You know that feeling, that quiet wait that follows you into the morning before you even open your eyes. The moment you wake up and before a single word is spoken or a single task begins, something old is already there, waiting, pressing, reminding you of what happened, what was said, what was lost, what cannot be undone. Many people live this way for years, not because they are weak, not because they are broken or incapable of healing, but because no one ever taught them the difference between the pain that life gives and the suffering that the mind creates. No one ever sat down with them and said, gently but clearly, the event is over. What continues is a choice. Not an easy choice, not a simple one, but a choice nonetheless. And today, that is what this reflection is about. You may have tried before. You may have told yourself to move on, to let it go, to stop thinking about it. And perhaps for a moment it worked. Then something small happened. A song, a smell, a certain quality of afternoon light. And it all came rushing back as if no time had passed at all. As if the wound had never closed. As if you were standing again in that moment, feeling everything you felt then, with the same weight, the same ache, the same tired question underneath it all. Why can't I just be free of this? The answer, as it turns out, is not about willpower. It is not about being stronger or thinking more clearly or finally reaching the right conclusion about what happened. The answer lives somewhere quieter than that. It lives in understanding how the mind works, why it holds on, and what it actually means to release something, not by erasing it, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by changing your relationship to it so completely that it can no longer steal your present moments. Buddhist wisdom has been exploring this territory for thousands of years, not as abstract philosophy, but as lived, embodied practice, the kind that people in real pain tested against real suffering and found to be genuinely true. What emerged from that testing is not a set of rules or a program of self improvement. It is something gentler and more radical than that. It is a series of understandings, 7 of them offered here, that, when truly absorbed, begin to loosen the grip that the past has over your daily life. You don't need to believe in anything. You don't need to change your worldview or adopt a new identity. You only need to be willing to look at what you're carrying and ask, with real honesty, does holding this serve me? Does reliving this protect me? Does the suffering I create in my own mind match the facts of what is actually happening right now, in this moment, in this breath? If you find yourself reading these words and feeling something stir, some recognition, some quiet ache, some tired hope, that is not coincidence. That is your own wisdom beginning to surface. Stay with it. Before we go further, if this kind of reflection has ever brought you even a moment of relief or clarity, consider subscribing so that more of these teachings can find their way to you when you need them most. Now let us begin. There is a teaching in Buddhism that most people hear and immediately understand intellectually, then spend years learning to actually feel. It is the teaching of impermanence, called anicca in the ancient language of Pali. And it states simply that nothing in existence is designed to last. Not the pleasant things, not the difficult things, not the version of yourself that exists in this moment, and not the version of you that existed in the moment when the painful thing happened. Everything changes, everything dissolves. The seasons do not hold on to summer out of preference. The tree does not mourn each leaf. The river does not grieve the water that has already passed downstream. You may have heard this before and thought, yes, of course things change, but that doesn't help me stop hurting. And that response is completely understandable, because hearing about impermanence is one thing, feeling it in your body, in your nervous system, in the way you actually experience memory. That is something entirely different. Most of us were never taught to feel impermanence. We were taught to solve, to analyze, to understand. And so when pain arrives, the mind immediately goes to work, turning the event over and over, looking for the explanation that will finally make it stop hurting. But the mind cannot think its way out of suffering. It can only feel its way through it. What impermanence actually offers is this: the moment that hurt you no longer exists. It is gone. The words have dissolved. The situation has ended. Even the cells in your body that felt that pain have largely been replaced since then. What remains is a mental reconstruction, a story the mind tells itself, made of selected fragments and emotional residue, played on a loop, and each time the loop plays, the body responds as though it were happening again. The jaw tightens, the chest contracts, the breath grows shallow. The nervous system cannot tell the difference between a memory and a present event. It only knows what the mind gives it. Understanding this doesn't erase the memory, but it begins to change your relationship to it. When the loop starts, and when the old scene begins to play again, there is now the possibility of a small, clear recognition. This is a memory, not reality. This is a reconstruction, not the present moment. This already ended. And with that recognition, something in the body can begin slowly to soften. Imagine holding a handful of sand. When your hand is relaxed and open, the sand rests there without effort. But the moment you close your fist, the moment you tighten your grip, trying to keep every grain in place, the sand begins slipping through your fingers faster. The tighter you squeeze, the more you lose. Holding on to what has already passed works exactly this way. The effort of clinging is precisely what keeps you from rest. This is the first gift that impermanence offers: not forgetting, but releasing; not erasing, but no longer gripping. The past happened. It was real. It mattered. And now, it is done, and you are still here, and the present moment is waiting. Not with judgment, not with demands, just waiting, quietly and patiently, for you to arrive. There is a teaching in the Buddhist tradition that is sometimes called the parable of the two arrows. The Buddha described it like this: when a person is struck by an arrow, they feel pain. That is natural. That is unavoidable. But if the same person is then struck by a second arrow, one that they themselves release, the suffering becomes far greater. And that second arrow, the Buddha said, is the one we most need to examine. Life delivers the first arrow. Something happens: a betrayal, a loss, a failure, a rejection, a wound that could not be anticipated and could not be avoided. The pain of that first arrow is real and deserves to be honored. You are not asked to dismiss it or minimize it or pretend it didn't hurt as much as it did. It did. It was real. You were there, and you felt it, and it mattered. But the second arrow, that one comes from the mind. It comes in the form of replaying the scene again and again, searching for the moment where you could have done something different. It comes in the form of asking why. Why did this happen? Why to me? Why didn't they understand? Why wasn't I enough? It comes in the form of building elaborate hypothetical futures that will never exist, or alternate pasts that cannot be recovered. It comes in the shape of self-blame that has no limit, criticism that never reaches a conclusion, punishment that never arrives at forgiveness. The first arrow created a wound. The second arrow, and the third, and the fourth, and the 15th, keeps the wound open. Not because the original pain demands it, but because the mind has not yet learned that the shooting can stop, that it is allowed to stop, that you are allowed to put down the bow. Most people who suffer chronically from their pasts are not suffering because The original event was too large to survive. They are suffering because of the sheer accumulated weight of everything they have told themselves about it since. The story has grown. The interpretation has calcified. The identity built around the wound has become so familiar that releasing it feels, strangely, like a kind of death, as though without this pain there would be nothing left to be. But that is not true. On the other side of releasing the second arrow, there is not emptiness. There is just this moment, clear, spacious, real. There is just your breath moving in and out. There is just the world continuing as it always has, with ordinary beauty and ordinary difficulty and ordinary grace. When you notice the second arrow, when you catch yourself in the act of shooting it, you don't need to feel ashamed. You don't need to fight the reflex. Simply notice it. Name it quietly. This is the second arrow. I'm hurting myself right now with something that already ended. And in that noticing, a small but genuine freedom opens. Not all at once, not permanently, in an instant, but it opens, and each time you notice, it opens a little more. The third understanding begins with a river. Imagine standing at the bank of a wide, slow-moving river, watching the water pass. You dip your hand in, and the water touches your skin. A moment later, that water is gone. Downstream, no longer here, replaced completely by new water that touches your hand, as though nothing has changed but is, in fact, entirely different from what came before. This is true of every moment, and it is true of you. The person who was hurt, the one who stood in that moment when the painful thing happened, is not entirely the person reading these words right now. You have changed. Your biology has changed. Your understanding has changed. The very neurons in your brain that encoded that memory have been reshaped by every experience you have had since. You are not who you were then, and carrying the pain of who you were, as though it still belongs to you now, as though it is still your wound to hold, is like carrying the luggage of a traveler whose journey has already ended. This is not a dismissal of your history. Your experiences shaped you. They contributed to your wisdom, your depth, your capacity for understanding that you could not have developed any other way. But there is a difference between being shaped by something and being imprisoned by it. A tree is shaped by the wind, bent and angled by decades of pressure, but it is not the wind. It lives its own life, in its own present, reaching toward its own light. You are allowed to have been changed by what happened without being defined by it. You are allowed to carry the lessons without carrying the wound. You are allowed to remember without reliving. The river is still moving, and so are you. In a well-known story from the Buddhist tradition, two monks are walking together when they come upon a woman standing at the edge of a swollen river, unable to cross. The elder monk, without hesitation, picks her up in his arms and carries her across. The two monks continue walking in silence. Hours later, long after the river, long after the village, long after the sun has shifted considerably across the sky, the younger monk finally speaks. "How could you do that?" he asks, voice tightened with disapproval. "We are not supposed to touch women." The elder monk looks at him with quiet calm. "Brother," he says, "I set that woman down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" There is a particular kind of suffering that is not about what happened to you. It is about what you continue to carry after it has already ended, the situation resolved, or at least the acute phase of it ended. The conversation finished, the relationship closed, the moment passed, but the mind picked it up and began walking with it, and has not yet figured out how to set it down. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and still the weight is there, still occupying the arms, still pressing on the shoulders, still claiming space that belongs to the present. Ask yourself honestly and gently, what are you still carrying that you could set down today? Not forget, not erase, not pretend didn't happen. Simply set down, simply allow to rest ginab on the ground behind you while you continue walking forward, lighter, freer, more present, for the life that is actually happening right now. This is not about being a monk. It is not about achieving some elevated state of spiritual detachment. It is about something much more practical and much more human than that. It is about recognizing that your arms are full of things that have already ended, and that the present moment, with everything it is quietly offering, is waiting for you to arrive with open hands. The practice here is small, but powerful. The next time you notice yourself returning to something that ended, a conversation you keep replaying, a wound you keep pressing on, a scene you keep reconstructing, pause for just a breath. Place your feet flat on the floor and feel the ground beneath you. Then ask yourself, very simply, is this happening now? Not in my mind. Is it happening now, in this room, in this body, in this breath? Most of the time, the honest answer is no, and that no is the beginning of freedom. There is perhaps no insight in all of Buddhist teaching more radical in its simplicity or more difficult in its practice than this one. The present moment is the only moment that is real. The past is a reconstruction, imperfect, selective, colored by emotion and shaped by the stories we have told ourselves since. The future is a projection built entirely from fears and hopes, neither of which exists yet. Only this moment is actually happening. Only right now is genuinely real. And yet, and here is where the suffering lives, most people are almost never here. The mind is trained through habit and through culture to live somewhere else, to replay what happened yesterday, to rehearse what might happen tomorrow, to evaluate, compare, analyze, anticipate, regret. The present moment is treated like a waiting room, a brief pause between the past you're processing and the future you're planning, rather than the only place life is actually taking place. The Buddha called this practice sati, mindfulness, full presence, the returning of attention to what is actually here. And he returned to it again and again, not because it is mystical, but because it is the most direct path to relief from the particular kind of suffering that the thinking mind creates for itself. When you are genuinely here, feeling the temperature of the air on your skin, noticing the rhythm of your breath, aware of the sounds around you and the ground beneath you, there is no room for the past to take over. The past requires your mental absence. It requires you to be somewhere other than now. The moment you return to the present, the past loses its grip. This doesn't mean the past never comes. Memories arise. They will continue to arise. The practice is not to prevent them, but to meet them differently, to notice them as mental events rather than present realities, to let them pass like clouds, crossing an open sky without grabbing onto each one and pulling it down to examine. The sky is not disturbed by the clouds. It simply holds them as they move through. You can learn to do the same the next time a painful memory surfaces, not to run from it, not to suppress it. Try this. Take one slow breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Say to yourself quietly, that was then. This is now. Then notice what's actually here. The chair beneath you, the light in the room, the simple, undeniable fact of being alive in this moment. That is not nothing, that is everything. Of all the misunderstandings that prevent people from healing, one of the most common and most painful is this: the belief that accepting what happened means approving of it, that releasing the past means pretending it didn't hurt, or forgiving what cannot be forgiven, or surrendering to something that was genuinely wrong, that moving forward means admitting defeat. And so people hold on, not because holding on helps, but because letting go feels like a betrayal of their own pain. But acceptance, in the Buddhist understanding, means something entirely different. It means acknowledging the fact of what occurred without adding unnecessary resistance to that acknowledgement. It means saying, "This happened. It was real. It affected me. And no amount of suffering on my part will change it, undo it, or make it retroactively different." Acceptance is not agreement. It is clarity. It is removing the layer of struggle that surrounds the wound and exhausts the person long after the original injury has passed. Think of it this way. When you resist what has already happened, when you argue with its existence, when you replay it, searching for the moment you could have intervened, when you demand from the universe an explanation it will not provide, you are not protecting yourself. You are not honoring your pain. You are pouring energy into a direction that has no outlet. You are pushing against a wall that does not move, and the pushing costs you something real. Your present, your peace, your capacity to feel joy in the life that is still available to you. Acceptance does not ask you to be at peace with injustice. It asks you to recognize that your internal struggle, separate from any external action you might take, changes nothing about what happened and costs you everything about what is still possible. You can grieve and accept at the same time. You can be angry and accept at the same time. You can wish deeply that things had been different and still accept that they were not. Acceptance is not the end of feeling. It is the beginning of carrying those feelings without being crushed by them. If these words are meeting something true in you today, consider subscribing. There is more here, offered regularly, for anyone who is learning to walk more lightly. The final understanding is perhaps the most quietly revolutionary of all. In the Buddhist teaching called anatta, often translated as non-self or the absence of a fixed, permanent identity, there is a gentle but thorough dismantling of something most of us carry without examining, the belief that we are our story. Over the course of a life, the mind accumulates events, and around certain events, especially the painful ones, it begins to build an identity. I am someone who was betrayed. I'm someone who failed. I'm someone who was abandoned, who was not enough, who made an irreversible mistake. The wound becomes a label. The label becomes a lens. And over time, the lens becomes so familiar that seeing through it feels like seeing clearly, when in fact it is just seeing narrowly through the filter of a few moments selected from the vastness of an entire life. You are not your history. This is not a motivational phrase. It is a description of something genuinely, verifiably true. The you that exists right now is not a fixed thing. It is a living process, constantly changing, constantly being shaped by new experience, never actually the same from one moment to the next. What you call yourself is more like a river than a stone, always moving, always renewing, held together by continuity, but never actually static. The painful story you have been carrying, the chapter that your mind keeps returning to as though it defines you, is one chapter. It is not the book. It is one thread in a fabric that stretches far wider and runs far deeper than any single experience. The person who hurt you did not get to write the final word of your story. The mistake you made did not seal the conclusion of your life. The moment when things fell apart was not the definition of who you are. It was a moment lived by a version of you that has already, in real and measurable ways, continued to change. You are the one holding the pen, and you can choose, not once, but again and again, not to write the same sentence on every page. The wound was real. The chapter was real. And you are still writing. There is still open space on the page. There is still story that has not happened yet. Story that has nothing to do with the weight you have been carrying, and everything to do with the choices available to you in this moment, in this one, and this one. This is not an instruction to forget. Memory is part of being human, and some memories deserve to be held as lessons, as sources of wisdom, as evidence of your own survival and strength. But holding a memory as information is entirely different from living inside it as though it were still your present reality. You can remember without returning. You can know without reliving. You can carry the lesson without carrying the wound. These 7 understandings: impermanence, the second arrow, the ever-changing river, the weight you set down, the reality of now, acceptance as clarity, and the authorship of your own story, are not a program to complete. They are not steps that lead to a destination called healed. They are practices. They are ways of meeting yourself and your history with enough gentleness and enough honesty that the grip of the past slowly, organically loosens, not because you forced it open, but because you finally stopped holding on quite so tightly. Some days, this will feel natural. Some days, the loop will start again before you even notice it has begun, and you will find yourself halfway through the old, familiar suffering before you remember that you had a choice. That is not failure. That is being human. The practice is simply to notice and to return, to notice and to return, again and again, without judgment, without the added burden of criticizing yourself for how long it takes or how many times you forget. You have been carrying a great deal, more perhaps than anyone around you fully knows. And there is something genuinely courageous about being willing to look at that weight and ask whether you still need to carry it, whether the past that lives in your mind reflects a reality that is still present or an event that is already quietly ended. The present moment does not ask you to arrive perfectly. It does not require that you have resolved everything, understood everything, forgiven everything. It only asks that you arrive just as you are with whatever you are carrying and allow it to be enough. Because this breath is real. This moment is real. And somewhere beneath the weight of everything that has already happened, beneath the noise of all the stories and the grief and the unanswered questions, there is something in you that is still whole, still here, still capable of warmth, of rest, of joy that does not have to be earned. That wholeness was never taken from you. It was only temporarily obscured. And it is waiting, not in the past, not in some healed future version of yourself, but right here, right now, in the simple act of breathing and being present and choosing one more time to set down what you no longer need to carry. May you walk forward lightly. May the past rest where it belongs. And may you find in the ordinary moments of this very ordinary day more peace than you expected. If this reflection served you, subscribe, so that whenever you need to find your way back to yourself, there is somewhere quiet to return to.